He used to think something was wrong with him. Not in a dramatic way, just a quiet, nagging feeling he couldn't shake. He'd walk into a room and immediately feel small. Try to speak up, but his voice would hesitate. Make eye contact, and it felt like a performance. On the outside, he looked fine, put together, calm, even. But inside, he was drowning in second guesses. Confidence felt like a language everyone else spoke fluently, while he stumbled through with a broken accent. He read the books, watched the motivational videos, tried the morning routines, but nothing stuck. It was like his self-belief had a leak, and no matter how much he poured in, it just kept draining. And then almost by accident, he quit one thing. A habit he thought was harmless, normal, just part of life. At first it felt meaningless. Then everything started to change. Not instantly, not dramatically, but quietly and undeniably. He didn't realize it yet, but that one decision was the turning point. The moment his confidence finally stopped slipping through his fingers and started growing from the inside out. From the outside, everything looked fine. He had a job, a decent apartment, a couple of friends he could text on the weekends, and a family that checked in occasionally. Nothing extraordinary, but enough to pass as doing okay. He smiled when people greeted him, laughed at the right moments, said "I'm good" when someone asked how things were. It wasn't a lie, exactly. It was just what everyone expected to hear, but inside, that was a different story. He felt disconnected, like he was watching life from a step behind glass. His mind was always foggy, like he was stuck in some kind of emotional waiting room, aware that time was passing, but not really participating in any of it. He'd scroll through social media and feel invisible, sit in a group conversation and feel like his voice didn't belong. Women made him nervous. His voice felt too quiet, his presence too weak, and he hated that feeling. The shrinking. That silent, constant shrinking. He told himself it was just his personality. Maybe he was just naturally shy. Maybe some people just aren't meant to be confident or assertive or magnetic. Maybe he just wasn't one of those guys. He accepted it, in a way. Told himself that confidence was for other people, the outgoing ones, the lucky ones, the genetically gifted. He had read all the advice online. Be yourself, love who you are, speak with your chest. But when the moment came, when he had the chance to speak, or flirt, or stand his ground, his body betrayed him, his mouth dried up, his heart raced, and he backed down again and again. It wasn't fear exactly, it was something duller. Like his spirit had gone on mute. He started noticing how often he avoided things. Little things. Eye contact. Speaking first. Leaving the house when he didn't have to. He said no to invitations that felt even slightly uncomfortable. Convinced himself he was tired or not in the mood. But deep down he knew it was avoidance. Pure and simple. And the more he avoided, the smaller his world became. His mornings were the worst. He'd wake up and just lie there, staring at the ceiling. No rush to move. No sense of urgency. He didn't hate his life, exactly, but he didn't feel excited by it either. It was just neutral. Bland. Like eating plain rice for every meal, every day, forever. Nothing felt urgent, or thrilling, or alive. The only real spark of stimulation came from that one habit. The thing he told himself everyone did, so it couldn't be that bad. He didn't even realize how often he did it anymore. It was just part of the routine. Wake up, scroll, tap, escape. Sometimes twice a day, sometimes more. It wasn't even about pleasure at that point. It was just automatic, like scratching an itch that wouldn't go away. 5 minutes of relief, followed by this wave of emptiness. He'd close the tab and immediately feel it. The dip. The subtle drop in motivation. The fog rolling back in. And then came the shame. The "why did I just do that again" feeling. He told himself it wasn't a big deal. He'd stop one day. But days became weeks. Weeks became months. And every time he indulged, it felt like another layer of confidence peeled away. He started noticing things. He didn't hold eye contact with cashiers anymore. He hesitated before speaking. Even around people he knew, his shoulders slumped without him realizing it. He stopped going to the gym, lost interest in dates, even stopped trying to dress well. What was the point? He already felt invisible. Dressing better wouldn't fix that. Nothing would. That's what he told himself. Anyway. But something didn't sit right. He knew there was more inside him. Some version of himself that wasn't so small, so stuck. Every now and then, he'd catch a glimpse of it. On a rare day when he felt good. When he went a few days without the habit. When he actually moved his body, talked to people, felt present. It was rare, but it was real, and it made the rest of his life feel like a shadow. He didn't talk to anyone about it. What would he even say? I feel weak, but I don't know why. I think I'm addicted to something nobody talks about, and it's ruining my mind. He figured no one would understand. Or worse, they'd say it was normal, harmless. That he was overthinking it, so he kept it quiet. But he kept watching. Watching himself shrink. Watching his mind dull. Watching his confidence erode in slow motion. And the worst part? He didn't have some rock-bottom moment. No dramatic wake-up call. Just a quiet realization, one random afternoon, that he didn't recognize himself anymore. He looked in the mirror and saw someone tired. Not physically tired in the soul. A man who had given up on something important, without ever realizing he'd given it up at all. That's when it started clicking. It wasn't that he lacked confidence. It was that he was doing something every day that took it away. It was subtle, easy to miss. But it was there, gnawing at the edges of his self-respect, like termites in a wall. From the outside, everything looked fine. But inside, the collapse had already begun. It started with a pattern, one he didn't mean to notice. He wasn't trying to change anything. Not yet. He was still stuck in the fog, still going through the motions. But every so often, he'd have a good day. Not an extraordinary one. Just a day where things felt lighter. He'd feel a bit more clear-headed, a bit more grounded, a little more like the man he wanted to be. He'd speak without hesitation, smile without faking it, walk with a bit more certainty. And at first he chalked it up to random luck. Maybe he slept better. Maybe the weather helped. He didn't think too much of it. But then he started journaling. Not because he had some grand plan to heal himself. He just wanted to organize his thoughts. Couple of sentences in the morning. A few observations before bed. Nothing deep, just a way to stop his mind from spiraling. And that's when he saw it. These better days, they always had one thing in common. He hadn't indulged in that habit. No late-night scrolling, no mindless clicking. No empty dopamine hit, disguised as relief. It hadn't even been intentional at first. Sometimes he was just too tired. Sometimes he had company or stayed busy enough to forget. But without fail, the days he skipped it were better. Not perfect, just better in a way that felt real. The discovery was subtle, but it hit hard. Like finding fingerprints at a crime scene you didn't realize had been a crime. He started testing it. He'd go 2 days without the habit, then give in on day 3, and every time he returned to it, the aftermath was the same. A strange hollowness, like something had been taken from him. He'd feel flat, slow, less alive. His motivation would vanish. His thoughts would turn foggy. He'd look at himself in the mirror and see the difference. Not physically, but in the posture, in the eyes. A subtle but undeniable slump in presence. Something had been knocked out of alignment. Still, he doubted himself. It seemed ridiculous. How could something so common, so normalized, have this kind of grip on him? Everyone did it. Every guy joked about it. There were memes, websites, even articles telling you it was healthy and stress-relieving. And maybe for some people, it was. But not for him, because for him, it wasn't a joke. It wasn't a harmless pastime. It was a ritual. A deeply ingrained escape route that he didn't even realize he relied on. Every time he felt anxious, overwhelmed, lonely, bored, that's where he went. It was predictable, comforting, even. But afterward, he always felt worse. He started getting honest in his journal, tracing the days, connecting the dots. What he found was uncomfortable. The habit didn't just sap his energy, it weakened his character. Every time he gave in, something subtle broke inside. He stopped respecting himself, stopped trusting his own willpower. It was like a quiet betrayal. He'd tell himself he wouldn't do it again, and then he would. And each time his self-image took another hit, not because of morality or shame, but because he was proving again and again that he couldn't keep promises to himself. And that did something deeper than he expected. It created this silent identity, not someone strong or disciplined, but someone who gave in easily, someone who talked about goals but never reached them, someone who wanted to be better but couldn't get out of his own way. That's what started eating at him the most. Not the act itself, but what it meant, what it was training him to become. Every repetition carved a deeper path of weakness into his brain, and now that he could see it, he couldn't unsee it. The hardest part wasn't quitting, it was facing the truth. That for years he had been undermining his own growth without realizing it. That this tiny daily behavior, so normalized, so overlooked, had slowly rewired his brain to avoid pain, seek numbness, and settle for less. He wasn't just losing confidence. He was training himself to expect less from life, and from himself. But now that he knew, he couldn't go back to pretending. The pattern was clear, crystal clear, and with that clarity came a quiet challenge. What would happen if he stopped? Not for a day or two, not as a test, but for real, cold turkey. Just to see what would surface. Could he do it? What would it reveal? Was there a different man buried beneath the distractions? He didn't announce it, didn't make a post, didn't set a reminder on his phone. He just stopped, quietly, deliberately. And the first day felt uneventful. No major breakthrough, just a slight edge of clarity, like wiping dust from a window. But the next day, that edge grew. His thoughts were quicker, his energy more stable. His mind felt less crowded. He had more time, too. Time he didn't realize he'd been wasting. Time to think, time to move, time to breathe. By day 3, the urge came back strong. That itch, that pull. His brain begging for the comfort it had grown addicted to. But this time, he didn't cave. He sat with the discomfort, watched it, didn't judge it, just observed, and slowly, the craving passed. And what came after wasn't pride, it was peace. The kind of peace that comes from knowing you didn't run away from yourself. He was starting to understand now. This wasn't just about a habit. This was about power. The power to choose discomfort over distraction. To stop numbing and start feeling. To rebuild the foundation of his confidence. Not through words or tricks, but through action. The kind of action no one else sees. The kind that happens when you're alone in a room with your temptations and you say no. That was the pattern. And now it wasn't just something he noticed, it was something he was ready to break. The decision to quit came quietly, but the aftermath hit like a storm. He didn't expect it to be easy, but he also didn't expect it to feel like losing a part of himself. At first it was just restlessness. His hands didn't know what to do. His thoughts kept drifting back to that familiar escape route, like a car trying to turn down a road that had suddenly been blocked off. He felt agitated for no reason. Irritable, tense, like something inside him was constantly buzzing. The first night was the worst. He couldn't sleep, his mind wouldn't stop running. It kept asking the same question in different forms. Why are you doing this? He had no dramatic reason. No external punishment. Just a quiet sense that the habit was costing him something important, and he wasn't willing to pay that price anymore. But that first night dragged on like an argument with himself. Every excuse surfaced, every justification. You've had a long day, it's just a little thing, it's not like it really matters. The temptation wasn't even about pleasure anymore. It was about silence, about turning down the noise in his own head, about feeling something predictable in a world that felt constantly uncertain. But he resisted. Not perfectly, not gracefully. He sat on his hands, paced around the room, did push-ups on the carpet just to burn the energy off. But he didn't cave. And in the morning he felt flat. Not victorious, not proud, just tired. Emotionally heavy. He thought quitting would make him feel stronger instantly. Like flipping a switch. Instead it felt like losing a shield, like walking into a battlefield with no armor, and realizing how exposed you really are. He started noticing how much time he used to spend inside that habit. Time spent avoiding himself. Without it, he had to sit in the discomfort of his own thoughts. And those thoughts weren't kind. They were sharp, cruel even, telling him he'd fail, telling him he was wasting his energy, telling him no one really cared if he changed. By the third day, the cravings weren't just physical, they were emotional. A wave of tension would build inside him during random parts of the day. A wave that used to be drowned out by that habit. Now it just sat there, loud and heavy. He realized then that the habit had never been about satisfaction. It was sedation. It was a way to numb all the things he didn't want to feel. Loneliness, boredom, rejection, failure. It was easier to chase short hits of dopamine than to sit still and look his life in the face. And now that he was doing that for the first time in years, it wasn't pretty. He remembered one night clearly. He was sitting alone, phone on the table, staring at it like it was calling to him. He didn't move for 10 minutes, just sat there, breathing, fighting the impulse. It felt ridiculous, fighting so hard against something so small, but it wasn't small. It was symbolic. If he gave in, he knew what it meant. The habit still owned him. And if he didn't, maybe just maybe he'd get a piece of himself back. So he stayed still. He let the discomfort rise and fall. And something unexpected happened. It passed, not easily. But it passed. And when it did, a strange calm followed. Not joy, not triumph, just stillness. And that stillness felt better than the high ever had, because it wasn't borrowed. It wasn't followed by guilt or regret. It was real, earned, honest. He began to see the withdrawal for what it really was, a kind of detox, not just from the habit, but from the lies it came with. The lie that he needed it to relax, the lie that he couldn't go without it, the lie that it wasn't affecting him. The truth was, it had woven itself into every part of his life. It was the background music to his anxiety, the undercurrent of his low energy, the invisible thread linking his self-doubt to his lack of momentum. Quitting wasn't just about stopping a behavior. It was about pulling that thread until the whole illusion unraveled. Some days were worse than others. There were moments where the urge returned with such force it made his whole body tense. Times where he found himself halfway to relapsing without even realizing it, mindlessly opening tabs, reaching for his phone like muscle memory. But each time, he caught himself a little sooner, fought a little harder, reminded himself of what he was building. Not perfection, not some fantasy version of himself, just a man who could look in the mirror and trust what he saw. Over time, the urges started losing power. They didn't vanish, but they lost their grip. He started filling the empty spaces with new habits, things he used to enjoy but had forgotten about. Reading, journaling, walking, even just breathing deeply for no reason. It felt awkward at first, almost forced. But it was something. And something was better than slipping back into nothingness. And maybe the most surprising part of all, he started feeling, really feeling. Not the numb autopilot mode he used to live in. He felt anger, joy, frustration, inspiration. And yes, sometimes loneliness. But it was clean, not polluted by shame or false comfort. He cried one night, not because he was sad, but because for the first time in a long time, he felt alive, like he had finally stopped running. He realized withdrawal wasn't the enemy, it was the gateway. The discomfort wasn't a sign that he was breaking, it was proof that something inside was healing. And what he learned during those first few weeks would become the foundation for something bigger. Because once you survive the storm, you start to see what was really worth saving. Something shifted, and at first he couldn't explain it. It wasn't dramatic. No fireworks, no montage of achievements, no sudden burst of alpha male energy. It was quieter than that. But real. He noticed it on a random Tuesday. Someone spoke to him at work, and instead of mumbling or second-guessing his response, the words just came out. Calm, clear. He didn't analyze it afterward, didn't replay it in his head 10 times like he usually did. He just moved on. That was new. That was different. His body started catching up with his mind. He stood straighter without realizing it. His shoulders weren't pulled tight with tension. His eyes met people's gaze more easily. Not out of force, but because it felt natural. He wasn't performing confidence. He was becoming it. Slowly, authentically, without needing to pretend. There was no more hollow posturing, no fake bravado, just presence, stillness, the kind that says, I know who I am, even if nobody else notices. And that stillness wasn't empty. It was earned, it came from hundreds of micro-decisions no one saw. The times he chose discipline over comfort. The nights he said no to the thing that used to own him. The mornings where he woke up and faced life without escape. There was something powerful about knowing that he didn't need to check out anymore. He didn't need to reach for a digital fix to feel okay in his skin, and that power started building momentum. His thoughts became sharper, more focused. He noticed when his posture slouched, and corrected it, not because he was trying to look confident, but because it felt better to stand tall. He spoke more in group conversations, not because he had something rehearsed to say, but because silence no longer scared him. He was okay taking up space now. He didn't shrink when people looked at him. He didn't flinch at disagreement. He didn't retreat into silence out of fear that he'd say the wrong thing. He just existed unapologetically. For years, he thought confidence was something you practiced like a skill, that if you just repeated enough affirmations or watched the right videos, you'd unlock some secret code. But now he saw it differently. Confidence wasn't something you stacked on top of your fear. It was what grew when you cleared the fear out. When you removed the things that made you feel small, weak, ashamed. The habit he quit, it wasn't just a behavior, it was a belief system, one that whispered to him every day, "You're not enough. This is all you get." And by quitting it, he wasn't just removing a routine, he was rejecting that belief. Every time he said no to it, he was saying yes to himself. He didn't tell many people what he was doing. Most wouldn't understand. But the ones who noticed saw the change. One friend said he seemed more grounded. Another asked if he'd started therapy. A coworker told him, without prompting, "You seem more sure of yourself lately." They didn't know what had changed, and he didn't explain. He just nodded. Because how do you explain to someone that your entire sense of self is slowly being rebuilt from the inside out, one quiet battle at a time? Even his inner voice changed. The critic that used to narrate his every move, the one that whispered doubt and fear and worst-case scenarios, started getting quieter. Not gone, just less convincing. And in its place, something new started to speak up. A calmer voice, one that said, "You handled that well." One that said, "You've got this." And eventually one that said, "I'm proud of you." That voice had been silent for years, buried under shame and guilt, and 1,000 broken promises. Now it was coming back to life. And that was the part he hadn't expected. The pride. Not the kind that needs praise or validation. The kind that lives deep in your chest and says, "I trust myself again." Because that was the real confidence he'd been missing. Not charm, not swagger, not charisma. Just trust. Trust in his own decisions, in his own strength, in his ability to face discomfort and keep moving anyway. He still had doubts. He still had hard days. But they didn't break him like they used to. He didn't spiral at the first sign of discomfort. He didn't numb himself the second things got hard. He faced them, took a breath, showed up anyway. And over time, those little victories added up. Not into some Hollywood transformation, but into something better, a quiet, unshakable belief that he was becoming someone solid. This was a new kind of confidence. The kind that didn't demand attention or seek approval. The kind that wasn't loud, but couldn't be ignored. It showed up in how he listened, how he walked into a room, how he handled rejection without collapsing, how he stood firm without aggression. He didn't need to prove anything, and ironically, that's what made him magnetic. People could feel it, that self-contained energy, that inner clarity, that peace. He looked at old photos sometimes, from a year ago, and barely recognized himself, not because he looked different, but because of what he remembered feeling. The tension, the dullness, the constant second-guessing. And now, it was still him, just upgraded. Not a new version, a remembered one. The man he was supposed to be before the world taught him to escape himself. That's when he knew he was onto something deeper than a streak or a self-improvement phase. This was becoming a way of life, a standard, a promise to himself that he wouldn't go back to living half alive. He had tasted something real now, something clean, something that didn't disappear the moment the screen dimmed or the video ended. And once you taste that kind of confidence, the kind you earn, not borrow, you don't want to go back. You can't, because nothing else compares. The changes started stacking. Not all at once, not in some explosive transformation, but gradually, consistently, like bricks being laid in a foundation he didn't even realize he was rebuilding. He used to wake up and drag himself through the day, feeling like a passenger in his own life. Now his mornings had weight, purpose. He wasn't bouncing out of bed with a grin on his face. That's not real life, but he was up, alert, moving. His limbs felt stronger, not from lifting heavier weights, but because they actually had a reason to move. He walked differently now, not to impress anyone, just with direction, with presence, with a kind of invisible force guiding him from one task to the next. His energy, once unstable and unpredictable, started to level out. He used to live in highs and crashes, sugar spikes, emotional dips, moments of false motivation that would burn out before they ever became action. Now he noticed something foreign but powerful: consistency. He didn't have to force himself to do things. He just did them. The voice that used to whisper excuses, "Do it later, you're too tired, it won't make a difference," had grown quiet, because he'd stopped negotiating with it. He wasn't interested in bargaining with weakness anymore. He had goals now, not just fantasies. At the gym, things felt different too. The weights didn't seem lighter, but he felt heavier in a good way, more grounded, more stable. Like his body finally remembered it was built for strength. He used to go through the motions, hoping for change. Now he trained like a man on a mission. Each rep meant something. Each drop of sweat was proof that he wasn't who he used to be. And that sense of progress, it bled into everything else. His diet improved naturally. Not from guilt, not from shame, just from alignment. Junk food stopped tasting the same. Empty pleasures didn't satisfy. He craved fuel now. Food that made him sharper, faster, more focused. His mind followed. Where he used to drift into endless distractions, scrolling, browsing, watching, wasting, he now found stillness. He could sit in a room and think without spiraling. He could read a full page without his eyes skipping ahead. That was new. His focus, once fragile, now felt like a sharpened blade. He wasn't just reacting to life anymore. He was planning, executing, building. The kind of focus that doesn't make you feel busy. It makes you feel powerful. And then there was the part he never talked about out loud. The part most men don't mention, even to each other: his masculinity. Not the loud, insecure version that shows off or dominates conversations. The quiet one. The deep one. The kind that doesn't need to prove anything to anyone. That part of him was waking up. For years it had been dulled, numbed, confused. Because when you give your body easy rewards over and over, when you teach yourself that pleasure should come without effort, you're not just killing time, you're killing instinct. His drive had been buried under that. And now, with that habit gone, it was coming back in waves. He started noticing how he carried himself. The way he stood, the way he shook hands, the way he looked people in the eye. He felt tension in his jaw, not from stress, but from strength. Like his body was remembering how to be a man again. Not just a guy going through the motions. There was no rage in it, no aggression, just steadiness, calm, direction. The kind of presence people notice before you even speak. He found himself more attractive. Not in a narcissistic way, but in a way that made him respect his own reflection. He looked in the mirror and saw a man who showed up for himself, who made hard choices, who didn't need external validation to feel solid. That kind of self-respect, it radiates. He wasn't trying to impress anyone, but people started responding differently. A slight shift in how women spoke to him. A new level of respect in how men listened. Not because he changed his personality, but because he showed up differently. His energy spoke before he did. He remembered a conversation with a friend, someone who had known him for years. "You seem different," the friend said. "I can't explain it, but it's like you're more locked in." That was the word. Locked in. To his goals, to his values, to his strength. And the more he stayed consistent, the more that feeling deepened. He wasn't afraid to challenge people now. He didn't avoid hard conversations. He didn't dilute his opinions to make people comfortable. But he wasn't aggressive, either. He didn't need to be. His presence was enough. Even the way he handled setbacks changed. He used to spiral. One bad day would throw him off for a week. Now he brushed things off with quiet certainty. He knew who he was. He knew where he was going, and he wasn't willing to throw it all away just because something didn't go his way. That was the gift of discipline. It made everything more stable, more resilient, less fragile. And underneath it all was a sense of momentum, not hype, not manic excitement, just real quiet motion, forward, upward, daily, the kind of momentum you don't announce, the kind that builds slowly but never stops. He was becoming the kind of man he used to envy, not perfect, not flashy, but real, clear, centered. It all started with one decision, one thing he gave up. Something so small it seemed meaningless, but the space it left behind became sacred. A place where something new could grow. Energy, focus, strength, masculinity, and most importantly, belief. Belief in himself. Belief that he wasn't broken, he had just been asleep. But now he was waking up. And this time, he wasn't going back. The strange thing about changing yourself is that people don't always know what to do with the new version of you. At first, no one noticed. His world didn't pause the day he quit that habit. No one clapped. No one said, "Good job, man." That's the reality. When you decide to become better, it happens quietly. Alone. You're still in the same room, around the same people, but everything feels different on your end. The first few weeks of change felt like walking around with a secret. He was becoming sharper, stronger, more grounded, but the world hadn't caught up yet. It was like being ahead of a ripple no one else could feel. Then the comments started. Nothing dramatic. Just little things. "You've been kinda quiet lately. You seem different. You good?" He'd nod and smile, not feeling the need to explain. Because how do you explain to someone that you've been quietly rebuilding your entire sense of self while they were watching Netflix? But the more consistent he became, the more obvious the change was. Not in what he said, but in how he carried himself. People noticed it before they understood it. There was a new weight to his presence. Not louder, just more solid, less reactive, more intentional. And some people were drawn to it. Others were confused. He met up with an old friend one night, someone who had known him through his most aimless seasons. They used to laugh over meaningless conversations, drink too much, waste time talking about what they might do someday. That night, though, the dynamic had shifted. His friend talked like nothing had changed. Same jokes, same distractions. But he couldn't connect to it anymore. Not out of judgment, but because it felt hollow. Like watching a movie you used to love. But now realizing the acting isn't that good. The conversation ended with a weird silence. His friend looked at him and said, "You're different now, huh?" He didn't deny it, just smiled. Because he was, and he liked who he was becoming more than he liked being understood. Not everyone took it well. One group of friends, guys he'd known for years, started making jokes. "What's this new monk phase you're in? You quit that? What for? You trying to be a saint now?" They said it with laughter, but it wasn't all in fun. There was discomfort under the surface. People feel it when you stop participating in the same cycles they still depend on. It challenges them, even if you don't say a word. His silence became a mirror, and not everyone liked what they saw. One guy in the group, usually the loudest, started poking harder. "You think that stuff was holding you back? Man, it's normal. It's healthy. You're just being dramatic." That comment stayed with him, not because it hurt, but because it revealed something. People defend their habits the hardest when they know, deep down, those habits are defending something else. He realized then that this wasn't just a personal journey, it was a cultural one. He wasn't the only one who'd been numbing, the only one who had felt powerless. He was just one of the few who had finally said, "I've had enough." But even in that tension, something surprising happened. One by one, guys started pulling him aside. Not in front of the group, quietly. Privately. "Hey man, I've actually been thinking about quitting too. Do you ever feel like it's messing with your head? How did you even start?" They didn't say it with bravado. They said it like men carrying a secret they didn't know how to talk about. And he listened. Not with advice, just with presence. Because he remembered what it felt like to be stuck, to be ashamed, to feel like you're the only one going through something everyone pretends isn't a big deal. It dawned on him that most guys are starving for connection, but we hide behind sarcasm and screens. We joke about our addictions, we normalize dysfunction, We cheer each other on for numbing, but stay silent when someone tries to rise above it. And when one man chooses growth, it creates friction, but it also creates a path, a quiet example that maybe things can be different. Maybe we don't have to keep living half awake. He didn't start preaching. He didn't start making motivational speeches. He just kept showing up as himself, consistent, grounded, sober in the deepest sense, not just free from a habit but free from needing to escape. And the more he owned that energy, the more people respected it. Some couldn't handle it, they drifted, faded out of his life without saying goodbye. But others leaned in, started asking questions, started doing their own inner work. The social shift wasn't about popularity. It wasn't about gaining followers or admirers. It was about alignment. For the first time in years, the people around him started reflecting who he was becoming, not who he used to be. He found himself in deeper conversations, real ones, the kind where people talk about purpose, struggle, discipline, meaning, not just trends and games and surface-level drama, and those conversations fed him in ways his old habits never could. He realized something else too. The more honest he was with himself, the less approval he needed from others. That was a huge shift. He used to measure his worth by how people responded to him. Did they laugh at his jokes? Did they notice him? Did they like him? Now, he felt stable even when people didn't get him. He didn't need to perform. He didn't need to explain. His value wasn't up for debate anymore. And in that space, where he stopped chasing validation and started living from conviction, his relationships got better, clearer, stronger, not more numerous, but more real. He didn't need 100 people to like him. He just needed to live in a way that made him proud. And from there, everything else started falling into place. The social shift wasn't easy. It forced him to let go of old attachments, old roles, old versions of himself. But it was necessary, because sometimes becoming the man you're meant to be means outgrowing the version of you that everyone else is comfortable with. And once you do that, you stop living to be accepted and start living to be authentic. He didn't set out to be an example. In fact, when he started, he felt like the last person anyone would look up to. He wasn't a guru. He didn't have perfect habits. He didn't have a platform or a plan or a message. He just had a problem, and he got tired of letting it control him. That was it. A private decision, in a quiet room, to stop doing something that made him feel small. And somehow, that one decision started changing everything. Not just for him, but for people around him. It was never about going viral. It wasn't about being right. It wasn't about proving anything. But real change has a way of echoing into places you never expect. The first time someone told him, "Because of you, I decided to quit too," it hit him in a way nothing else had. This wasn't theoretical anymore. It wasn't just about self-help or discipline or inner peace. This was impact. Real people, real stories, real shifts. And the more he kept showing up without preaching, without judging, the more the dominoes started to fall. One guy quit after years of feeling addicted. Another started journaling and noticed the same patterns he once saw. Another left a toxic relationship after realizing he'd been using it to numb the same emptiness he used to run from. None of them were looking for perfection. They were looking for power, the kind you only find when you stop giving it away to the same thing every day. He started getting messages, quiet, personal ones. Not big emotional essays, just lines like, "I tried it, I feel different," or, "Day 5. It's hard, but I'm still going." And he remembered what that felt like, those early days of fighting cravings and second-guessing everything. He remembered the doubt, the silence, the way it felt like no one else understood. So he replied to every message, not with advice, but with respect, because it takes strength to even try. And that strength is contagious. What he realized over time is that most men are starving for something real. We don't talk about it much. We pretend we're fine. We make jokes. We cope in quiet ways. But under the surface, there's this deep hunger for clarity, for purpose, for respect. And when you strip away the easy dopamine, when you quit the thing that numbs you, you start to feel that hunger again. At first it's uncomfortable, then it becomes fuel. And once you tap into it, you start building instead of escaping. That's the shift. That's what he had discovered. And now others were discovering it too. He watched as people who once rolled their eyes at him slowly started to change their tone. They weren't laughing anymore. They were asking questions. They were curious, not about the science or the statistics, but about how it actually felt. What changed? What was different? Because it's hard to argue with someone who's living proof. And he was not perfect, not polished, but proof that something better was possible. He never told anyone what to do. He never tried to convert or convince. He just kept showing up, consistent and calm. And that consistency spoke louder than any advice. It said, you don't have to live in the fog forever. It said, you can come back to yourself. It said, this path is open and it's waiting. And people started walking it. Not because they were told to, but because they were finally ready to see where it led. One guy reached out after 30 days clean, said he finally felt like a man again. Not because of testosterone or muscle or money, but because he could look himself in the mirror and know he had control. Another said his relationship with his wife had completely shifted. More intimacy, more presence, less guilt, less hiding. Another started meditating, something he used to mock. Said he was chasing clarity now instead of distraction. These weren't miracles. These were men doing the hard thing. The right thing. The thing that nobody applauds you for, but that changes your whole life anyway. He started noticing something else too. The language people used began to change. They weren't talking about quitting a bad habit anymore. They were talking about building a foundation, about identity, about masculinity. Not the performative kind, the real kind. The kind that shows up in silence, in consistency, in how you handle the quiet parts of your life. When no one's watching, and you still do what's right. That was the new conversation, and it felt good to be a part of it. He thought back to the beginning, the numb mornings, the invisible shame, the way he used to retreat into his own mind because facing the world felt impossible. And now that memory felt like a different lifetime. Not because it disappeared, but because he had built so much distance between who he was and who he is. That distance was built one decision at a time, one quiet no at a time, one moment of clarity in the face of chaos. And now that distance had become a path and others were walking it too. What started as personal discipline had become quiet leadership, not the kind that seeks followers, but the kind that leads by example. A ripple effect, a domino line. One man choosing to stop numbing and start living, then another, and every time someone else chose the hard road, the fog cleared just a little more for everyone. He didn't need recognition. He didn't need applause. He already had the reward, his self-respect, his momentum, his peace. And now, watching others reclaim those things for themselves, that was the real win. That was the point all along. Because, at the end of the day, confidence isn't just about how you feel about yourself, it's about what you give to the world when you finally step into who you really are. And for him, the most powerful part of this entire journey wasn't quitting a habit, it was becoming the kind of man who no longer needed it, and helping others realize they could do the same. He didn't become a different person. That's the truth most people miss. There was no lightning bolt moment, no instant transformation, no version of him that woke up one morning suddenly overflowing with confidence and clarity. What happened instead was much quieter, slow, deliberate, and deeply personal. He didn't become someone else. He just stopped hiding from who he was always meant to be. And the moment he did that, everything started to change. He thought for the longest time that confidence was something he had to add, like an extra layer, like armor. He thought it came from more words, louder energy, stronger postures. But it didn't. Real confidence came from subtraction, from removing the things that made him shrink, from cutting out the habits that kept him small, from letting go of the escape routes that gave him comfort but stole his power. What was left underneath all that wasn't a weak, broken man. It was someone capable, steady, whole, and the only thing that had ever kept that man hidden was fear. Fear disguised as pleasure. Fear disguised as normal. Fear disguised as a habit he never questioned. He doesn't talk about it to everyone, because not everyone is ready to hear it. Some people still roll their eyes when he mentions how quitting one thing changed everything. They think he's exaggerating, being dramatic, that it's just another self-help phase. But he knows the truth. He lives it. and he sees it in the mirror every morning. That clarity in his eyes, that peace in his body, that presence in his voice. You can't fake that. You can't download it or fake it with tips and tricks. You earn it. One hard choice at a time. He looks back now at the man he used to be, the version of himself that felt lost, uncertain, half alive, and he doesn't feel shame. He feels compassion, because he remembers how heavy it was to carry that quiet sadness, the kind that doesn't show up in dramatic breakdowns, but in the way you avoid your own thoughts, in the way you stare at your phone instead of facing your reflection, in the way you keep telling yourself, "Tomorrow I'll fix it," while another month slips by. He knows what it's like to feel stuck in your own skin, to wonder if you'll ever feel whole again, and that's why he'll never go back, because he remembers exactly what it cost him to stay numb. The truth is, we don't talk enough about what we're giving up when we choose comfort over clarity. We tell ourselves it's harmless, that no one's getting hurt. But what about us? What about the life that could have been lived fully, the goals that could have been reached, the relationships that could have been deeper, the man we could have become? All sacrificed at the altar of a habit that gave us nothing lasting. He sees it now. Every time he chose the easy path, he was trading his future for 5 seconds of silence. Every time he gave in, he wasn't relieving stress, he was avoiding growth. And the price was steep. Now he lives differently. He walks into rooms without shrinking. He holds conversations without second-guessing himself. He trusts his own instincts, not because he's perfect, not because he's fearless, but because he earned that trust. He knows what it feels like to face discomfort and stay standing. He knows what it means to rebuild yourself from the inside out. And more importantly, he knows that if he can do it, so can anyone else, because this path isn't about talent or luck. It's about decision, about choosing to wake up, about choosing to feel, about choosing again and again to be better than you were yesterday. He'll never claim it's easy. The work is hard. The withdrawals are real. The urges don't disappear overnight. But neither does self-respect. And once you start building that, brick by brick, everything changes. Not just how people see you, but how you see yourself, how you move, how you respond when life tests you. And life will test you. That's guaranteed. But now he meets those tests with strength, not shame. With stability, not excuses. With confidence, not the loud kind, but the kind that doesn't shake under pressure. He's not done growing. The journey doesn't end. There are still days when he feels tired. Days when the old temptations creep in. Days when he has to remind himself why he started. But that's the beauty of the process. It's not about being perfect. It's about being real. And every time he chooses to stay real, he becomes a little more powerful, a little more alive, a little more of the man he was always meant to be. This wasn't about quitting something bad. It was about choosing something better. It was about making room for purpose, clarity, strength. It was about breaking a cycle that had held him hostage for years. And now that he's free, he wants other men to know they can be free too. It starts small, a single decision. One that says, "I'm done living like this, I want more." And once you make that decision, everything changes, slowly, quietly, but completely. So if you're watching this, and something inside you feels like it's waking up, listen to it. That voice, however small, is your future calling. It's the part of you that remembers who you are before the world convinced you to settle. You don't need to be fixed, you need to be honest. You don't need more tips, you need fewer distractions. The power you're looking for isn't somewhere out there, it's under everything you've been avoiding. He didn't become someone special. He became someone honest, someone consistent, someone who finally stopped lying to himself about what was just a habit. And in doing so, he became someone powerful. That same power is in you, right now, waiting. And the only question left is, are you ready to claim it?